So, as I mentioned, the topic why we choose topics such as vendor risk management, third-party risk management, supply chain. These are all connected topics, and due to COVID, impact of COVID, and in general, the overall momentum in this area is so significant that these kind of topics become relevant. And that is the reason we chose this topic. And hopefully, you will be able to get some useful insights as to how to manage third-party. So I'm the founder director, and I have 18-20 years of experience, mostly in risk management, enterprise risk management, having worked overseas as well as in India. And today or nowadays we specialize a lot in data protection, information security, and risk management. So I would like to go ahead and introduce our panel. So we have two members from the industry who have a lot of experience to share, and I would request Kalpana to introduce herself. She is essentially managing third-party risk management at Wipro. So Kalpana, please, over to you just for a minute or so at a high level, give your experience and background, and then I will also add and get other people introduced.
Yeah, sure, Manoj. Thanks a lot. So I am actually a lawyer by education, and I got into the risk role not many years back. And I've been fortunate to have an exciting career in risk management. And presently, I'm undertaking vendor risk management audits for third-party vendors. And it is definitely a challenging role, and also a very it's a surprise every day for us. I mean, when we look at a vendor, it definitely throws a different angle pretty much every day. There's nothing, there is no single vendor, even if the services are the same, the environment is different. So it poses a beautiful educational role. So and I have a total about 16 years of work experience. And but having said that, my majority has been legal, and then the rest of it has been risk and compliance. And I've, as I said, so it is currently this is the role that I'm taking. I'm undertaking, and it's very interesting. And Wipro is an organization which gives you multiple opportunities. So it's fortunate again to be part of Wipro and to do this role. So that's about me, Manoj.
Thank you very much, Kalpana. So we move on to the next panelist, Vishal Malik. He is a Global Director, Vendor Risk Management at HCL Technologies. So Vishal, quick introduction about yourself, please. Vishal, we are not able to hear you now. No.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can. Yeah.
Okay. Hi. Good morning, everyone. My name is Vishal Malik. I've been into this industry for last 17 plus years. 16 years of my career, I was with American Express, which is a very highly regulated company, and we have different rules and regulations and laws that we have to follow by as being a credit card company. And I was my last position held there was head of information security for vendor risk management. And from last 1.5 years, I've been with HCL, and I'm actually I created almost in the process of launching the the VRM framework for HCL, including the pre-contract and post-contract and different domains of vendor risk management that we will be evaluating our vendors on. So overall, as Kalpana said, vendor risk management, every time you meet a new vendor is a different story. No two stories match, and every time you get to experience something new. So it's a great place to be in. And that's about me. Over to you, Manoj.
Great. Great. Thanks a lot, Vishal. So let's move on. Again, as I mentioned, the flow is going to be a couple of slides just to give the context, and then we'll be essentially asking questions. If you want to ask specific questions from the audience, please do send it as a question in the format of a chat, and we will see those questions, and I can field the questions to all of us or either of us on an ongoing basis. So what are we really talking about today? Who is a third party? So it's important to understand what are third parties and where is the risk coming from. So the third parties could be it could be your customers in the form of things like reputation risk management. If you're dealing with bad customers, then you have a bad reputation. Ultimately, everything or every party that is connected with you brings in a certain level of risk. It could be vendors, subsidiaries, affiliates, contractors. Could be investors, shareholders, auditors, experts, consultants, freelancers, and various types of organizations would pose risks when it comes to third parties. There's a recent story. It's about again close to a year. There was a situation when we were going through extreme crisis. The pandemic had just started, and we had ordered. So the reason why I bring this story is also highlighting that when you need something the most at a very critical point, and if things don't work out, there could be really having deep repercussions. So India had to cancel orders for several testing kits from China after they were found to be faulty. So that's a time when you need the things to work. Then we need the things to work properly, and they were not working. And there was the reasons were. There was extreme stress and widespread disruption, and such scenarios will always impact quality. So whenever there is stress, there's a lot of volume, there is a lot of disruption in the whole supply chain. Quality is always impacted. So how do you ensure quality is maintained? That's a risk. And then companies need to order ahead of time and be prepared to reject full batches. So one of your resilience measures will be that in order for things to work, you have to be ready that you will not get what you want, whether it's a service or a goods. And you might have to deal with new and unknown suppliers because, this is a very uncertain scenario. Disruptions are there. So the parties are changing, the third parties are changing constantly in the marketplace. So this is an example, but it could be any event that can take place. It could be any organization. It can have any kind of scenarios. So moving on, there are about 4 or 5 sections in the session overall, looking at what really is, an impact of COVID on third-party risks. So this is a article that brings together some of the important points, things like kickbacks, bribes, conflict of interest. These scenarios are likely to increase during post-COVID scenario, and that is mostly because as I mentioned, there are quality issues, there are new suppliers getting onboarded, the old ones have closed or have lost businesses or have, basically wound up. So in those situations, whenever new things are created, new entities are onboarded, there is always an element of kickbacks and bribes to get the business enrolled. Irregularities in procurement, frauds, higher prices could be some of the fallouts. Counterfeit products to meet increased demands on certain areas. So our demand and supply is changing. Something that we had regularly wanted is people are not really wanting. But apart from that, certain types of products and services are highly in demand. So they will be likely counterfeit products, expired, damaged goods, and warehouse and leakages. Warehouse leakages due to shortage of manpower. So these are some of the things that typically can go wrong, or some of the factors that are getting impacted due to COVID. So I'll kind of now also ask our panel as to what they think are the potential fallouts. So I'll have some questions, and either of all of us or some of us can answer it, or basically add our views to what really could be the impact of COVID on third-party risk management. So the first question that we can kind of explore is, apart from the ones that have been highlighted above, what were some of the major impacts to vendors' supply chain risk due to COVID? And we can go to Kalpana, and then you can go to Vishal on what they think are some of the major impacts, or what they have experienced are the major impacts to the supply chain and third-party risk.
Thanks, Manoj. So what I have witnessed is, especially with respect to vendors where they're used for staffing or for the when they are used for some critical businesses within the company. And now the new norm is work from home, and so the increase on security has definitely gone up, and the visibility of third party has definitely gone up. Now it's almost like if a vendor is existing, it is considered a no when there is no risk management being done, or when there is no proper framework in place, when there's no governance in place, then it's definitely it's a very critical phase that we are going through. And also, I think what COVID has done is it has woken up people. It is the senior management has realized that third-party vendors, even though it is a very easy thing to adopt for transferring of risk, but it is still a risk per se, and it's just not third party, it is also the fourth party, when the vendors also have their own vendors. So I think the security aspects of risk management itself has really become a very complex affair. So and also with the and what is happening also is with the countries where we are having our companies, and where we're having our customers, and they have a different view to third party. So we have to create a balance, and it's like a ripple effect. So we're not worried about what's happening here. We have to worry about what's happening outside, and what the challenges that are coming from the customer side. So I think definitely there's a huge change in the way third-party risk management has taken up post-COVID. That's my view.
Great. Vishal, what are your views on this point?
I absolutely agree with Kalpana. Post COVID, most of the resources from the third party also started working from home, and the organizations or vendors who do not have a very strong vendor risk management program, or even some companies that don't even have one, so there's strict no. And also because of this COVID, how we assess our vendor is actually also changing. We expect our vendors to update their BCM program to ensure if there is a similar case like COVID, and in future if there is a sudden impact because of which everything comes to standstill, what is their BCP plan? How they will deal in a similar situation that comes in. So security aspect, information security aspect, as people are working from home, has gone up. So I second Kalpana's thought, and this is a major impact because of COVID.
Yeah, clearly. And also now that we think of supply chain disruption, I mean, so the point is there was a disruption for the last 6 to 8 months, and there may be some more disruption as offices start up and various vendors are getting on and coming back to normalcy. So do you think in the next few months normalcy will be back, or do you think that it's still going to take a lot of times, and this disruption is not over or may not get over very soon?
I think the normalcy will come back maybe in next another 6 months. We will be we would be allowed to go to office and start doing things BAU, but the fundamentally COVID has fundamentally changed how people think. Now for big companies, um, are seeing the benefit when the employees can work from home, and that helps them, let go of their offices, which they pay higher ends and everything about. And then if we have managed through this COVID and successfully, most of the companies have successfully, big companies have successfully managed COVID impact and are able to work BAU even in this situation. So from a normalcy perspective, yes, things will be normal, but I think this COVID has fundamentally changed the way we work, and we are going to work in future.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that's my thought on that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, Kalpana, you can add to the second one. And also going forward, will the vendor base become smaller as more and more companies want to, get better and high quality vendors? So essentially, the third point really is what I also at some point feel. More and more large organizations are wanting good quality vendors due to a lot of issues: data protection, information security, business continuity. They don't want to be in the lurch, in the sense like. They want people who are good. They want vendors who are good, who can supply on time, who can give good quality, and can keep the data secure. So, Kalpana, what would you want to add on the second or the third point? Do you think the vendor base will become small and more consolidation will happen, or do you think it will still be those thousands and hundreds of thousands of vendors, small vendors, freelancers supporting organizations?
Thanks, Manoj. So I agree with both Vishal and you. On the second point, what Vishal said was completely right. And I would add one more point or one more thought to this is the size of the company also matters, and the spending capability or the ability of the company also matters for both second and the third point. The reason I'm saying this is if it's a small company, definitely they're going to get more impacted by the vendors if they're using any for critical functions. And that would it would not settle down right after COVID, because they would have, like I said, they would have many angles that they would need to look at, not just the vendor aspect. And so I don't know whether they can settle down immediately after COVID, but I think for a larger company, it may be a little more easier than a mid-sized company. So that's my thought on the second point. And the third point on the vendor base, again, it would depend on the size of the company, the spending ability of the company, the focus or the strategy that they adopt post-COVID. Because now what's going to happen is it's not going to be how the businesses have been thinking all this while. It's been a very this is like a shock. It's a shock that's come to a lot of companies. So it purely depends on the strategy that they're going to adopt post-COVID, and what is the focus area that they're going to have, whether it's going to be vendor-based, or is it going to be internal, or is it going to be whether they're going to, it all depends on the landscape of the company and the customers, the end customers that they have, and what do the customers want. And so it depends on a lot of factors. So we cannot generalize and say, companies will have large number of vendors or less number of vendors. We need to just wait and watch, because as I said, COVID has definitely disrupted a lot of things. So it is just not one aspect. So vendors are a key part of a company, but that also get affected by other things. So we need to just check that. That's my understanding.
Yeah, so good overall, introduction on the impact of COVID. So it depends on size of the organization. It depends on the services offered, as well as there are fundamental shifts that will happen both from the company as well as from the vendor side. So kind of moving on to the next concept, vendor due diligence and onboarding. So when we look at due diligence can mean different things for different types of vendors and even for different organizations. Large organizations have a very well structured due diligence process. Small companies, 100 employee, 500 employee firms may have very basic onboarding formalities of KYC checks and vendor checks just to get the vendor onboarded, and they may not really have very comprehensive due diligence process. So fundamentally, what we have seen traditionally in India is if you break up the life cycle in three elements, there is vendor onboarding, which has basic due diligence for onboarding. Then there is monitoring and review, which is annual reviews, annual assessments of vendors and whether they are performing as intended. And then there's a termination and offboarding. So the color coding also kind of reflects what we believe is the risks in that. Generally, the onboarding, although that's the stage where the gating happens of the vendor, but if you get it right, it's still doable, and risks overall are low. Also because the involvement of the vendor is low at that point, the person has just started. But once the business process integrates very deeply with the vendor for 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, then there's so much data shared, so much back and forth, so much expectations and concentration. That the second part, which is monitoring and review, is generally what is lacking in India. So that's a very big risk area, red area. And the third, of course, is termination offboarding, which is also having its own risk. If you don't offboard, if you don't terminate relationships, then the risk continues. So most of the companies get the first piece right in some way. The middle piece is difficult to manage, and the third one is as needed, is slightly there, but not really there. So keeping this in mind, and also what can really go wrong with the current practices. So things like you have no visibility on what kind of data we share with vendors. There are so many businesses onboarding vendors, sharing different files, different databases, different applications. There is no one central source of what kind of data is shared. We have a lot of Excel-based questionnaires, which makes it very time-consuming to evaluate vendors. And also there is sometimes no single source of vendor list, which is giving them a full visibility. So when we carry out due diligence, we really don't have a good, strong foundation on which to kind of build upon it. Now, just looking at third-party risk management and also a vendor due diligence in context. So some of the questions that we can pose, and we can kind of understand how the panel, is building upon those, or how those organizations are working. So the first question here is, what new or different set of questions or due diligence aspects would we include when we evaluate these vendors going forward? So far, we have been doing certain level of things. Now, as there are fundamental shifts, we'll be doing different kind of assessments and newer set of questions. So Vishal, and then to Kalpana, what are the things that we definitely want to change in onboarding and monitoring of due diligence, and what do you think are the key aspects that we cannot live without? I mean, a company should definitely touch those points, otherwise we have a big risk on vendors. So what have you seen so far, and what do you plan to kind of change on the evaluation process?
So thank you so much, Manoj. I think all 3 points, right from onboarding the vendor to managing the vendor and then exiting the vendors, are 3 very, very important factors. Now due to COVID or whatever changes, I think vendor onboarding was also never been taken very seriously. In terms of what kind of controls do we have with the vendor before we onboard the vendor. What are the risks we are inheriting by onboarding this vendor? So it's very important that we do the right set of due diligence basis the services being provided by the vendor before onboarding the vendor. And if we feel there are things which are not correct, or they don't have that particular control in place, that has to be documented in the contract to ensure that we as an organization are safe. So first, vendor onboarding, ensuring due diligence, ensuring that whatever is shortfall, either they remediate or it's there in the contract that over a period of time they will remediate. Vendor monitoring, and it's very important to have a very strong governance process to monitor these vendors, how they're performing on a monthly basis or whatever the cadence is. And and there should be penalty clause or some sort of impact on their payment, so that they take this very, very seriously. Because once you onboard the vendor, it's more to do with the BAU business, but people forget about the risk aspect. So you monitor the vendor from not only from the business perspective, but also from a compliance standpoint, and make it penalize them if they don't have very good controls. And once they get that, they will once there is an impact on the payment, they'll definitely improve it. Offboarding again is something which people do terminate their vendors, but they don't have a very strong offboarding process, which it's very important for organizations to have an offboarding process where you make sure once the vendor is terminated or is removed, our data gets back or our assets are back, and somebody is able to look at the entire exit process and ensure that whatever we need back from the vendor is with us. So I think um, there will be more due diligence on all. There should be more due diligence in all these three aspects. That's my thought.
Sure, sure. Kalpana, what are your views on this?
Thanks, Manoj. So I agree with Vishal. I think he's covered pretty much all the aspects. But having said that, the different set of questions, I think what happens currently is the questions are not same for all the vendors. So, and also because of the current scenario, we are not able to go on site and we're not able to validate all of the questionnaires and check whether the controls are in place. Actually, we are just going by whatever evidences are being shared on through a remote method. So the questions are being framed in such a way that we are trying to gather as much as the information as possible through a remote setup. So I think that is the change that I see currently. So I think more emphasis is given where evidence-based is driven, and also the questionnaire itself is getting tailor-made for each and every service. It's just not whether it is even if it is ISO or NIST or whatever, the controls may be the same, but the questionnaire keeps changing based on the services provided. So the due diligence part again is also a very key role where the procurement team also takes charge of it. So there is a clear mandate where procurement team has to needs to pitch in and understand what is required before onboarding a vendor. And the legal team again is also a very key player. For example, where there are security clauses involved, and there are whether in case of liability and indemnity clauses, those things have to be clearly mentioned at the time of onboarding, because tomorrow it should not be that it is missed out because of this. And so all of the technical aspects and the security aspects, as well as the liability and indemnity clauses, need to be firmly put in place. And this needs to be communicated to the procurement team so that everybody is on the same win, because tomorrow it should not be a surprise element. So this is what I feel at the time of onboarding. It's very crucial that these aspects are taken care of.
Sure. And on the next question, which is more about business continuity. So clearly, as we come out of post-COVID, or while we are still coming out of this era, business continuity thus far has been just like a clause. So in the vendor contract, there's a clause that says we will carry out business continuity resilience testing by the vendor, but we don't really check it, or we don't really go on site to see can they really supply or provide the services that they are intended to. So then since the contracts so far have not been really enforced and we don't really monitor, would that change? And if it changes, how do we plan to enforce a strong BCP of the vendors? So Vishal, what are your thoughts on this? And do you think you will relook into some of these clauses for your contracts, or you think the current ones are broadly fine?
No, absolutely. We within HCL, we already have initiated over assessments over 200 vendors. We are not only looking at their security controls or their financial health and other stuff, but we are, from a BCP perspective, we want them to add and have a strong BCP program in place. And some people had earlier, some organizations had a stronger BCP plan in place, but we want now them to include situations like, like this pandemic or another situation where everything comes to a standstill. What is their BCP plan, and also link again, telling the same to, or working along with procurement to ensure that we push this in the contract where, the entire BCP clause and how they're going to manage our services from a BCP standpoint is there. So we have checked, and we are forcing our vendors to include and improve their BCP program, also update our contracts accordingly. So I think it's very, very important. BCP in today's world is very, very important. It's very important to create a situation where BCP can be evoked and check if it's working fine or not. So yes, we are. I think it's important, and it's needs to be updated by each vendor and needs to be updated in the vendor contracts.
Great. So, in just kind of moving on, there was a survey which is done by Refinitiv, and it kind of exposes a lot of lack of due diligence on business supply chain. So the research found that 43% of the third-party relationships are not subject to any form of due diligence checks, as companies just struggle. And that struggle could be due to the fact that there was a lot of disruptions and focus was elsewhere. But even if we come back to normal, the general trend is that many of the vendors are not subject to due diligence just because they are such a large vendor base, or the fact that resources are not there with respect to the due diligence. 62% of the respondents noted that they don't know the extent to which third parties are outsourcing work. So that brings in the concept of fourth parties. So a lot of companies don't know how much of their work is getting outsourced further. And 63% of respondents agree that current economic climate is encouraging organizations to take risks in order to win new business. So clearly, this will again be a shift, like as I'd mentioned. Some businesses will close and new ones will open up. So when new ones open up, their goal is to initially establish themselves and get new orders and get new business. So in that situation, there will be a lot of regulatory non-compliances, kickbacks, bribery, just to get onboarded, so we can start business. So these kind of risks are there, and I think when we onboard vendors, we might want to look at some of those risks only because there's a fundamental shift in the whole setup. So moving on, what is third-party risk management in India? Apart from the large organizations, how much does it happen in the small companies, the mid-tier, the listed, non-listed, private, family-driven businesses? So we'll ask again both the panelists and to share their views. Maybe Kalpana, we can start with you as to some of these things that impact India, or how is Tprm in India? So it's a new concept, and generally we see there are large companies that have dedicated teams for third-party risk management, vendor risk management. Do you think this will gain traction due to COVID or otherwise? Do you think more and more companies will have new departments set up for third party rather than just procurement managing it or risk managing it? So do you think it will grow significantly from now?
I'm not sure whether it would grow, Manoj. I think large companies are also getting more cautious about exposing themselves to vendors, because I use the word exposing because even though it's a large companies have been outsourcing to vendors for to focus on their critical activities, but COVID has definitely put the brakes on. And I think what large companies would do is maybe have a few vendors for critical aspects. In fact, even for security, for risk management, they could have vendors. But I don't think large companies at this point of time would be ready to increase their bandwidth with respect to vendors, because which means that the reason being they have to monitor it, they have to have a governance policy around it, It's more of a, and also, like I also already said, customers also are closely watching what the companies are doing. So it also depends on the customers as well, whether they're comfortable with for like a company like Wipro or HCL, whether they are happy to let them have more vendors. So I personally feel the vendors, it may increase after a year or so, but presently I don't see a big increase.
Okay, okay. So, Vishal, again, point one or two. So the first one is about, do we think that the methodologies or third-party risk management as a concept will grow? And second is that should TPRM be a dedicated function, or should it be a part of the procurement team? So what are some of your thoughts on either of these points with respect to how TPRM is going to evolve as a risk management approach in India?
So let me start with the first question. I think TPRM is actually a new concept, and it's only restricted to large firms, largely, and uh, TPRM, especially in India, is now taking a little, is now getting a little attention. Businesses are becoming serious about, having a good third party risk management program. But till till last year, before the pandemic hit, I think TPRM was taken very lightly by the firms. I think this will definitely change. People or organizations will ensure that they work on their third party risk management program and ensure that they have all the right controls. Also, the government, changes in government policies and privacy laws and others coming in makes, from a from a from a government standpoint also mandatory to have, stronger controls in place. That is what I feel for the TPRM. For the first question, uh, talking about should TPRM be a dedicated function or part of procurement, I think it should be a dedicated function. Procurement is more to do with vendor management or vendor onboarding or negotiating and stuff like that. Vendor risk management should be a separate function, though it will work very, uh, collaborate very closely with the procurement team, but it should be a dedicated, because you need those that, the mindset people, a skill to manage the vendors from a risk perspective. So I think it should be a dedicated function, but it has to closely work with procurement at any given point of time.
Sure, sure. And then, moving on to the third question again to both of you, Kalpana and Vishal. So far we have seen, and generally this is my perception, but I could be right or wrong. Typically, vendor onboarding or when contracts are awarded, pricing is the criteria. A lot of government-related tenders seem to be L1 based with a little bit of other elements involved. Whereas when multinationals, American companies, European companies are onboarding vendors, price is not really the main criteria. They look for a lot of things like anti-bribery, code of conduct, child labor, the facilities. They have various parameters on the basis of which selections are made. Is this likely to again change now as we are trying to mitigate more risks other than just financial risk or pricing risk? So, Kalpana, do we think that pricing will no longer be a very important factor in awarding a contract? Will we start including other areas to evaluate vendors, or do you think India will still continue to be very price conscious and not worry about other points? And then to Vishal after this.
Thanks, Manoj. Pricing is definitely a key indicator for selection of vendors, and it will continue to be so. The reason being, the businesses are cautious in spending, and even more so with COVID and pandemic like COVID. Having said that, vendors security has definitely become the key focus for onboarding a vendor or retaining a vendor. So adequate due diligence is being done by companies, and especially for critical processes. So, I would say pricing is definitely a criteria. They have not. I don't think any company would not look at pricing, but security goes hand in hand. And I think if I can say so, if out of 10, if pricing is 10, I think security would be 9, because it's become that critical now. I think all companies are going to give a lot of focus on security requirements. I read somewhere where it said that in 2020, around 53% of organizations have experienced at least one third-party cost data breach. I think that is a large figure. And so that, especially with pandemic like COVID, where everybody's working from home, and we don't know what kind of, if they've been given company laptops or desktops, that's fine. But what is the data going to them, and what is the, what's the data getting downloaded? So those are key thoughts that come to anybody. And so security will definitely play a very big role going forward. So, but we cannot overrule pricing as well. So I think they would go hand in hand, is my thought.
Vishal, what are your thoughts?
No, I absolutely agree, and it's if you have to stay in business, so vendors are realizing and will realize that they not only have to give us that competitive price, but they also have to give us a secure environment where we feel comfortable, getting them onboarded and give business to them. So if they want to stay in business, they have to continue to improve themselves from a risk perspective, and also be competitive in terms of money. So yeah, Indian market, because of COVID, as Kalpana said, and everybody is facing that financial setback, and price is a major factor. But I think over a period of time, vendors will start to improve on not only giving us good pricing, but having a strong risk management program in place.
Great. Okay, and then I guess this might be the last section. We are about 15 minutes until we conclude. We'll have to leave some 5 minutes or so for audience questions. There are 3 or 4 questions which we can take up. So kind of maybe concluding this very quickly, and also establishing some questions around it. Our goal in third-party risk management is essentially to find the weak link, or vendors that are really not performing. And this is a whole cascading effect. So if your vendor fails you, then you have a problem, and then onwards you cannot deliver, and then you fail on your customer, and then likewise. So the whole supply chain gets disrupted due to weak vendors, whether it's in the beginning of the chain, or it's really towards the end of the chain. So the question we should really ask is, can the suppliers or the vendors really survive the term? Can they actually deliver the services to us? So that's the business continuity, or the resilience aspect of it. And there are a lot of concepts in third party. What are the best practices? How companies are doing it? What is the frequency of due diligence? What are the tools that we can use? What are the risk factors we should look for? So every company will have its own unique vendor risk management program, and there's no right or wrong. It's just that it fits that organization well, and that's how they adopt it. But there might be some key elements or core elements that are fundamental to all sorts of vendor risk management programs. So let's hear it from Vishal and Kalpana on those. So just for the people who have joined slightly late, so Vishal Malik is from Excel Technologies, and Kalpana is from Wipro Limited. So I'll kind of ask both of you again to kind of conclude and summarize what could be some of the best practices to look for in vendor risk management and third-party risk management.
So, Kalpana, you want to go first, or I'll go first?
You please go ahead, Vishal. No problem. Yeah.
So, thank you. Some of the best practices, I think, to keep your program, very simple, and as Manoj said, there's no right or wrong, but if it meets your requirement, people shy away, or organizations, they shy away that, how will we create a TPRM program, how to make it more effective. It's such a time consuming thing and stuff like that. But, this matter will not get resolved if you don't put effort, or you have to look at that. It's very simple. You are onboarding a vendor, make sure they have the right controls in place before you onboard them. Contractually, make sure you are covered. Ongoing monitoring, and have a regular assessment at a regular cadence. High risk vendor, do it every year. Medium risk, do it once in 2 years. Low risk, once in 3 years. Whatever suits your organization, you should have that. The ongoing risk and monitoring, and then offboarding, to make sure that we have an strong offboarding process in place, which is simple, easy to understand, and easy to follow, both by vendor and by the procurement or our teams, or the organization teams. I think that's, keep it simple and have right controls at the right places. It should work fine. So that's, I think, the best practices that I can share. And Kalpana, please feel free to add on.
Vishal, I think you've covered pretty much everything. I don't think I need to add on anything. What you said is very correct. To keep it very simple and let the roles and responsibilities also be clearly demarcated, especially what you had earlier mentioned relating to the procurement and procurement being a separate, having a separate role and responsibility, whereas TPRM having its own responsibility, but going hand in hand. So that would really help in the risk management process itself. And of course, a very crucial part is managing the contracts, because that is also a very, very important part, and that would cover pretty much all the regulations and all the security clauses required. So keep it simple and keep it and don't make it complicated, so I mean, for anyone to understand. So I think that way it would run smoothly.
Yep.
And Kalpana, on the second point, again, it's a random question, but this often occurs. So if a breach or an incident occurs at a vendor, how do you normally respond? So what are some of the best practices? Looking at severity of the event, what are the actions typically taken? Because not every company would be taking the same set of actions. They may give it a second chance, third chance, or they may not even have an incident management process. So what do you think are some of the best practices for incident management?
Sure. So in Wipro, for example, we have a robust incident management process, and my understanding, or what I have seen, is happens is where we reach out to the vendor, we understand, again, it's a checklist based, so we kind of have a checklist and we reach out, and it's always to reach out and understand what is their environment, and it would relate to the incident or the breach, and it can depend, it may be a breach which has happened to which has happened, and it may affect the vendor directly or indirectly, and if that vendor is supporting a critical client of then it becomes even more pertinent that the vendor responses are validated and checked. So these are the few things that come to my mind when you think of a breach or an incident. So I think we need to reach out to the vendor, clearly defining what is the ask, and what is the reason for the breach, what has happened, and what is the impact, whether they have taken the measures, appropriate measures, and I think this is the way to go about the incident. Yeah.
Okay, then Vishal, on the third point, now do these due diligence forms and questionnaires and this annual evaluation exercise, does it really help? How genuine are these responses? So there are vendors who are getting large questionnaires and they respond with a yes or a no and things like that. So how do we detect false promises or a misstatement, or the fact that the responses are actually accurate? Because sometimes you may not be able to visit on site. You have to rely on self-assessments done by them. So what are your thoughts on the best practices around how we can, actually consume the information submitted to us?
Yeah, I think we should not take yes or no as an answer. We should always have a comment section where they brief and they talk about what controls that they have for each and every question, and then if possible through WebEx or through calls, you make sure that whatever you can see and do your best to check or through a WebEx, make sure that you do that, capture screenshots wherever required, and once uh, yes or no would not help as a uh, as a response. So elaborative description and comments, make sure you read it, clarify with the vendor if that's required. So uh, I think that's important. Sorry.
Sure, sure. So we have to actually force people
Yeah,
to submit more than just a yes or a no flag,
yeah,
so that we can get more insights as to whether it's right or wrong response.
right.
Okay. Okay. I guess let's kind of conclude at least the format or the flow that we have so far. There are some questions that are on the question panel. So I will read out and we can be very brief on that because they're very specific questions. So one of the question normally is, and any one of you can take it so that we can go through 5 or 6 questions, or maybe as many as we can. One of them is typically how much time an average due diligence takes for onboarding a supplier where data is being transferred. So there is critical data being transferred and we want to onboard a supplier. How much time does it normally take? So this is a question.
4 to 6 weeks minimum.
So
I
4
mean,
to
if you
6
want to have
weeks.
if you have the right due diligence that you want to do, understand the services, see what all risk domains you have to cover, like compliance, infosec, privacy, financial, whatever. Then accordingly send the questionnaire. Once you send the questionnaire, they will need some time to get their SMEs, fill up that questionnaire and send it back to you. And then you will go and set up a time for an assessment. You'll do the assessment, then you'll wait for artifacts, then you will prepare a report. So 4 to 6 weeks is an average time to onboard any vendor. That's
Sure.
and Kalpana, you can add.
Okay.
Thanks, Vishal. So I agree with Vishal, but having said that, it also depends on the complexity of the environment the vendor is getting into. Suppose if it's a company which has 200, 300 applications, and let's say a vendor is getting into the company, integrating it with one of the applications or maybe 2 of the applications, then again it may take a little more time than required because it would require the internal risks also to be validated, not just the vendor risks. So that may again extend by another week or so. Yeah.
Okay. And then the other question is, what is the difference in due diligence at the time of onboarding and continuous monitoring post the onboarding? So typically, would we have similar assessment methodologies, or would they be different? Kalpana, you want to take that, or if you have any thoughts on that?
The assessments would be the same, but the questionnaires may change and the questions may change. And also what happens is it's also, and we need to see the strength of the company with respect to if they've already had a third party audit done on the vendor. We need to check that. If that is done, then the assessment also starts changing based on that aspect. So definitely it changes. It's not the same.
You can actually
Okay, then to both of you. Yeah.
just to add on, I think while conducting assessments prior to onboarding the vendor, we look at the design level controls usually, and or ongoing monitoring, we actually do the control testing. We see, whatever controls they said that they have at a design level, are they functioning well? You look at evidences, you look at, Before onboarding, you can't do that because your data is not with them, and you can just look at a design level and do the assessment. So
Sure.
I think yes, there's a difference. Sorry, Manoj, go ahead.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, on the ongoing, you're typically looking for the actual operating effectiveness or whether they're really doing as they intended or disclosed to you. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay. The other question, which I don't know if I have an answer directly to, is so one person is asking: are there central registries or organizations that can provide an internationally accepted risk scoring for vendors? So essentially, the question is: are there any bodies that can give you data around a vendor and their scores? And are there registries we can subscribe to so that when you get on a vendor, we at least know some rating for them? So
There is
would any of you know?
there is BitSite. I'm aware of BitSite. So I think BitSite kind of covers vendors, but I don't know whether they cover all the vendors. But they do definitely they cover a huge number of vendors and their strength. Yeah.
Yep, I am aware of BitSite as well. That they give it, or now what another trend that has started is similar companies like financial companies, they get together, they form a custodium wherein wherever there are common vendors, they will do just one assessment, and then the report is shared with all of them, so that they they don't individually have to go and conduct an assessment. So that's another way people are trying to get ready-made reports for similar vendors.
Yeah, I think I've also heard about that. Another question is, do we have any specific ISO standard for managing vendors? My response, I mean, I'm not 100% sure on the ISO aspect. There are elements of supply chain vendor risk management throughout, but NIST and other international frameworks have dedicated methodologies, assessments for supply chain and vendor risk management. So are you aware of any ISO specific standards that companies can take up for managing vendors?
Yeah. So for ISO, it is ISO 27001. That would be the typical thing that normally is used, and for all the vendors generally. Yeah.
Yeah, because
Okay,
if
but that
the
will be more specific to information security. But with respect to the whole vendor onboarding life cycle, those kind of assessments, is there anything dedicated for that?
I don't think there is anything dedicated to that.
yeah, depending on what kind of risk that you want to evaluate as an organization. So financially, you have to use different ways to assess them financially. ISO primarily takes care of BCP, ISO 27001, BCP privacy and information security. Rest is depending on what all risk you want to review. You can create that accordingly for your organization.
Okay, maybe the second last question is, which are the best VRM standards and guidelines available in the industry that can be followed? So essentially, this participant is asking, what can I use as a foundation for vendor risk management?
I think ISO 27001, and then you have to mix and match. So there are different standards available. NIST is one of them. Information security. For financial, I think you have to, or regulatory, you have to monitor according to the services that are being provided. For giving you an example, if you're taking any services where the vendor has to collaborate with a government agency, so you should look at the anti-bribery, ABAC, OBAC policies for that vendor. So I think it's InfoSec, information security 27001, plus additionally whatever is required. Kalpana, you can
And
add
also India on its own doesn't have its own framework as such, like how in the US we have OCCs and other regulations. There is no foundational framework as such that is available for Indian companies.
Right.
No, there isn't. there isn't. And you're right, Vishal, it's ISO 27001 and NIST is what normally is used. So if it purely depends on the vendor and the security controls that you want to validate.
Okay, and then the last question is not really from the audience or audience plus my perception or my add-on to this is if we have to, both of you have to answer, if we have to look at a single risk factor to evaluate a vendor on, or this is the most important risk factor I want to mitigate of the vendors, then what would that be? Like, just one word or one or two words for that. So which risk factor are we really trying to address or you want to address or you wish this does not happen with any vendor?
I think it depends on the services that are being provided. So if you're sharing the data, information security privacy is the biggest concern that you should look at. If you're asking somebody to a contract which is over $5 million and you want to make sure that the services that vendor is providing financially stable and healthy. Tomorrow if he files for bankruptcy, your business will get impacted. So risk should always be basis the services that the vendor is providing.
Sure. Kalpana, what are your thoughts?
Same to Vishal. So it purely depends on the criticality of the services that is the vendors are providing, and it is critical to the business. Based on what services that they're providing, the risk is different, and it's calculated. In fact, when an audit is done, you normally talk to the business team to understand what services are being provided and kind of categorize the vendors, post which the audit happens. So we come to know the criticality of the services, and then they would fall into a critical bucket or a non-critical bucket. So it purely depends on that. Yeah.
Thank you very much. I think we have run over time by 5 minutes. I would like to thank both of you for taking your time out and sharing your views. I think it's definitely insightful. This is an emerging area and very important area. There have been a lot of questions. If there are any other further questions and that require your inputs, I would reach out to you through emails. Thank you very much both, and look forward to taking this further with you. Thank you. And thank you audience for participating. Thank you all.
Thanks, Vishal. Thanks, Manoj. Thanks a lot.
Yeah. Thank you, Kalpana. Thank you, Manoj. Thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful day ahead. Bye.
Bye.